Record. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today is Lianna Levine Reisner, and she is the founder of Plant Powered Metro in New York, and we're going to learn a little bit more about her today. So please welcome Lianna to the show. It's nice to meet you in person.
Thanks so much, Chef AJ.
Well, I can't wait to hear your story because I love, founder. I like people that find things or that invent things or discover things or start things. So tell us your story in founding this wonderful organization, or if you like, first, your own plant-based journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll start with my story. I'm a mom. I have 3 young kids, 10 and under, and a few years ago was a little confused about what I should feed my kids to be healthy. And that really took me on this meandering path to research whatever I could find. And I started with nutrition because it was something that my mom had been personally interested in when I was a kid and had helped my brother with. And I was, really surprised at how there weren't clear-cut answers if I went to this specialist over here or to my regular pediatrician. And so I kept looking, and it took me about 18 months of searching before I landed on the whole food plant-based movement and the research behind plant-based nutrition. But what got me at the beginning was an elimination diet that ended up reversing endometriosis for me. I had lived with endometriosis for almost 20 years. It's a common condition for women. And within 2 or so weeks of changing my diet, I was pain-free and I had normal menstrual cycles. And I was just amazed at what that meant for me. And I had never stopped before to think about the idea that food and hormones could be related to one another. And, for somebody who's educated, it's sort of like, well, duh. but no, like you have to stop and think hard about it. They don't teach you this in like home ec or health or anything like that. So once that happened, and once I found the evidence base that really explained why this was possible, that got me so inspired. And I was at the time, living in Manhattan and working as a consultant to Jewish organizations and synagogues around the area, was very interested in how to help organizational leaders build strong, healthy organizations that walk the talk of vision and values. And I realized that I had never really had my own passion project before. I didn't have my cause. And when I found plant-based nutrition, it became my cause. So I realized I just wanted to throw myself headfirst in. I studied all the things I needed to study, at least as a lay person. And then I went forward and I said, how can I bring this message out more widely? And so my first stop along the way was with Plant Pure Communities. I met Jody Cass and some of the folks who worked for Nelson Campbell's organization. And I got really inspired by the idea of working at the grassroots level to bring people together and just learn from them. Who else was doing this? Who else knew about it? Why did they know about it? How were they living it? How were they continuing to live it after many years? All those questions were just really exciting for me. And as I started to meet people through that process, I took on the leadership of a local pod in Manhattan, part of the Plant Pure Communities pod network. And it inspired me to go even deeper. And really the founding of Plant Powered Metro New York, it was the coming together of myself and other leaders of other local pods who we found to work amiably together. And we thought we could do a lot more together than we could working on our own. So the whole idea was to build a stronger platform for grassroots leadership so that those of us who are inspired and changed by plant-based nutrition can actually feel more comfortable going out and doing it. Because it's not easy for folks who don't have, culinary expertise, a doctor, a physician's degree, anything like that. Like it felt like we needed to have more credibility behind us. So creating an organization that would do that was really what was at the core of founding Plant Powered Metro New York.
Well, I love this because so many people I interview, what they're doing in the world now is a result of having maybe had a health opportunity that was the impetus for them to create something wonderful in the world like you did.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really great because once we got started sort of more integrally collaborating with one another, we knew early on that we would create a lot of interest for many more people to get involved in what we were doing. And we wanted to stop thinking about the idea of leadership as a thing that only the most ambitious and motivated people could do. And so a lot of what we do with Plant Powered Metro New York is trying to help people who might feel more timid or might not have the credentials. Here goes my Manhattan siren. And just make sure that, if you feel passionate about it, that you have an outlet for that passion and community. So we've created a lot of different ways that people can volunteer with us or express leadership. And it's everything from, just being an amazing voice of outreach in the community to putting on educational programs to creating partnerships with local communities where we do much deeper educational work. People who are the educators themselves, people who can facilitate support groups or other kinds of spaces, and then folks who work behind the scenes creating resources or helping with, basic organizational work that we need. So.
Right. So you said you suffered with endometriosis for 20 years. Were you still able to have children despite this? And what did the doctor say caused your condition and what you should do about it before you?
Yeah. That's a great question. So at the time when I was diagnosed, I was actually in my 20s. It took a long time to get a diagnosis because they don't often do it until you have some invasive procedure. And after my first daughter was born, I had an ovarian cyst that they found, which they thought would threaten my fertility. And I actually did not have other issues with fertility other than that. But when they went in to remove the cyst through laparoscopy, they did find that there were what they call endometrial implants, the sort of telltale signs of endometriosis, and that the cyst itself was actually an endometrioma, which is related to the condition as well. So, I had never been told that there was any relation between diet and this particular disease. The standard of care is to help regulate hormones by putting us on the pill. So I was, on the pill for many years, essentially, I guess, since high school. I remember coming back from let's say a pretty indulgent trip to Israel with my grandparents where we ate meat and dairy all the time. I didn't actually do that as a kid because we kept kosher in my home and we lived in a town where we didn't have a lot of access to meat. So I had what you might call like a semi-vegetarian diet, sort of occasional meat eater. And certainly dairy was a feature in my diet, but as I got older, I started to eat more cheese. And I think that with time, that probably opened the Pandora's box of the disease. So by the time I was in high school, after that big trip, things were really rough. And I would have to go home from school, with a lot of pain. I couldn't focus. And I would talk to my friends and say, you don't feel this way? And they're like, no, it's uncomfortable, but it's not really painful. And I was like, I don't understand. Why am I so unlucky? So they put me on the pill and that seemed to help in certain ways, but I don't think it wasn't really doing much for me. I think it regulated the pain, but otherwise it was still tough to manage. And then, as an adult, I went back to it postpartum and it was really only when we found the ovarian cyst that we actually knew what it was. And so that, that was sort of like a trigger of understanding, but it didn't lead to the next step of searching, which is why is it here and what should I do about it that might be different from a pharmaceutical approach? So I just feel like every woman who has these kinds of issues needs to have more tools in their toolkit to be able to have that discussion. And even when I went back to talk to the gynecologist about it, she didn't really think that there was any evidence connecting these two things. And the truth is there isn't enough scientific evidence, the studies that have been done on this, but there's certainly a link for dairy, for gluten, and a few other issues.
Well, I think there's enough anecdotal evidence, and with books like Your Body in Balance by Dr. Barnard, I think he does make the case that there isn't quite a big correlation between many of these diseases and diet.
Absolutely. And I love Dr. Barnard's book. I think it's such a missing link in the narrative that we have around plant-based nutrition. There's so much around heart disease and diabetes and obesity and all of those sort of, top things that are related to mortality. But when it comes to day-to-day living and how women feel, I think that was a really important first step for the conversation.
You said it took only 2 weeks to feel better. What was your first point of entry into the plant-based diet?
So even before I found the research, and Dr. Campbell's work the China Study, Whole, those books were really my first books. I did go to an alternative health practitioner who said, you know what, I think you've got a candida issue. I want you to be on this elimination diet, anti-yeast. And so it took out all these processed foods, and it took out, different kinds of animal foods. I wasn't going to eat them anyway, because my husband had been a vegetarian at the time, and we don't have meat in our home. But what I found is this actually happened even before the elimination diet. I went off of gluten and dairy for 2 weeks to try to clear up my skin. I've always struggled with my skin. And after those 2 weeks, I started the elimination diet, and the very next day, I had a very normal period for the very first time in my life, and I was amazed. And so there was either something about dairy or gluten or yeast or something that just seemed to be a major trigger for me. And then, over the course of those next few months, I lost a ton of weight, and I just felt so much more energy. And when I didn't know why this was working. And so in hindsight, after I went through the process of learning about what the research said, it was absolutely a move toward an unprocessed plant-based diet that was behind the success.
Well, I love that you said an unprocessed one, because you said you lost a ton of weight. So you must have had some weight to lose, but if you had just adopted, say, a junk food vegan diet, you might not have had the same results.
Correct. Yes. And I was lucky. I mean, so this was after my second pregnancy. I was carrying a lot of weight from my son and really couldn't shake it. Now, I wasn't exercising either. I wasn't doing a whole lot of good for my body, but it was just the food itself that really put me in that direction. I really can't point my finger at anything else. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say these stories are typical. The more and more people I interview, and the fact that it happened so quickly is amazing. Was it hard for you to adopt this diet? Did you know how to cook this way? Was there a period where the food didn't taste as good, where you missed things like dairy, and were you able to get your family to join you?
Yes, absolutely. So it was not such a hard thing for us and for me to change how we're eating. I felt inspired, and I remember standing in the grocery stores, of course, looking at all the shelves and saying, what's in this, what's in this, what's in this, and realizing just how toxic everything was around me. But I guess I had gone off of gluten for a few weeks before that, and I successfully cleared up IBS. So I had already done this thing where I went away from wheat and found quinoa and found all these other things. And my husband, being a vegetarian, was already, very interested in having exotic vegetables in our house. So we had done CSA shares and had kohlrabi and, things that were not common. So I knew what to do. And I feel, a little blessed that I was able to make the transition without too much of a hassle. But when it came to the kids, we took processed foods out of the house earlier on, because I realized even before we went fully whole food plant-based that sugar was just such a problem and was creating addictions right and left. And it bothered me, frankly, to see how my kids reacted to junk food. And I didn't want that dynamic. I wanted them to know and to feel good in their bodies and to recognize what was going to play with their minds. So again, with my husband being vegetarian, he was more than happy to embrace more of a vegan approach, and didn't really know himself. He was always a nonviolence kind of guy. He didn't want to kill anything, and that was behind his vegetarianism. So when he learned more about the violence that's behind dairy and eggs, that made it easy for him as well to change what he was doing. But we still have, conversations about, do we really need to be oil-free, or do we really need to do this or that? And the truth is, I feel good being more pure about it. I feel like we have plenty to stand on here, and there's so many food options. The kids definitely have an amazing palate. Not that they're all eating beautifully all the time, but they really do, eat their greens when it's in a smoothie, and they know what we have to avoid when we're out at other events. And they ask questions. They say, can I have this? And it's a conversation, it's a recognition. And I think that's the awareness that I'm so grateful we've been able to create for them, so that they understand, they can see around them what is food, what isn't, and what might be in a gray zone.
So did your husband notice any improvements in his health?
That's a great question. I certainly see improvements to his skin when we do a more high raw approach. It's been great. He actually lived with celiac disease for a long time, and so gluten is now fully out of the house for all of us. And the truth is he didn't feel better after kicking gluten. He was one of those unfortunate celiac patients who, continued to be symptomatic, and actually it seemed to get a little worse post kicking gluten. But, I think that there are a lot of benefits that we're experiencing, and especially, one of the things I love is, as somebody who's not athletic, going out and running after periods of dormancy like we have during COVID and managing kids in the household. It's been intense. But then I go out for a run and I don't get that feeling like I got to stop, or I'm like huffing and puffing. I feel like my body functions properly. And I think that we're both just so much more appreciative of the capacity of the human body to be resilient, even in tough times.
That's great. How old were your kids at the time you first made the switch, and how old are they now?
Yeah, so my kids now are 10, 7, and 4. And we switched to a whole food plant-based diet as a family when they were, let's see, 6, 4, and I don't know, like 7 months old. So my little one, I think I introduced her to like egg and dairy just when she started to eat, as a way of helping to like get the antibodies or the things that she might need in case she ever had stuff later. But then we fully switched over to the kitchen, and that's the end of it.
Wow. Was that a plant-based pregnancy with your third child?
Not quite. It was close. This was, I was pregnant during the time when we were sort of in between. I had done this elimination, was confused and searching, and then came to find Dr. Campbell's work. So it was an amazing pregnancy, being mostly plant-based and mostly unprocessed. I only gained 25 pounds in that pregnancy, which is considered a normal weight gain. And with the other two, I had gained over 50 pounds, and I am 5'2". So having an extra 50 pounds on this frame is a lot of work.
Yeah. So do your kids know why they eat this way?
Absolutely. Yes. It's really important to me that they have the knowledge. I mean, my 4-year-old, she doesn't really understand it. We talk about health, but we also try not to overplay the health narrative with her, so that she doesn't look at what her friends are eating and say, oh, I'm so concerned that this person is eating something unhealthy. I don't want her to.
That's funny you said that, because Dr. Ellen Goldhammer's son actually did that and got kicked out of the Waldorf school for saying, your parents gave you a bologna sandwich. They must not love you. They're trying to kill you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I wouldn't want her to do that. But I don't want to scare her. She's very empathic. And when she looks around at what's around her, I think she just feels very deeply. So, but my big kids know, and we have a lot of discussions as a family and with them about, how do I deal with the fact that my friends are eating a certain way, or that this is being served at a family function or at a party or in a celebration at school, and we know that it's actually contributing to disease. My daughter, my oldest, who's 10, she was very inspired to she put together a cafe concept. Like she wants to go out and really do plant-based in a bigger way, I think, as she gets older. We'll see if that actually happens, but she knows why, she understands it, and she wants to be a part of it. And I think that hopefully my modeling will move her in that direction more.
That's great. Other than health, do they have the ethical piece at all? Like, did you explain to them where meat really comes from?
Yes. Yeah, we've spoken about it. And, we've actually had some lovely excursions lately. We've been going out more and heading to farms. We stayed at a horse farm apartment in an Airbnb one night earlier this week. And we went to visit the Rodale Institute, actually, in Pennsylvania, which is an amazing leader in organic agriculture. And they've got animals there. And so the question is, well, what do you do? What do you do about these situations? And I feel really good. My kids definitely understand that there's not only the ethical component, but also the environmental impact. And I think that calls to them, especially, again, my oldest, as she gets older, she really feels deeply when there was the whole Greta Thunberg episode with her coming overseas and speaking. They made a big deal about it at school. And my daughter was like, why aren't they talking about animals and eating animals being a problem? So it became in her school environment, like when they were talking about environmentalism. So I think I love having these conversations with them, because I know that they're being they're going to be really great global citizens in addition to understanding what to do in their day-to-day lives. Let's hope, knock on wood.
You mentioned, I believe that you grew up keeping kosher, and maybe you still keep kosher today.
Yes, we do.
Me too. And I noticed, like, the people that keep kosher, they don't eat animal products. Like, it doesn't matter if they're on a trip or if somebody offers it or somebody made it just for them. They just don't. They don't eat non-kosher food. And I find that ethical vegans are the same way. You know, but people that are kind of just have their toe in it or maybe doing it for health only, it's very easy to have that wiggle room. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing I think I forgot to mention is that I think changing our diet and just, it's like putting new restrictions on what kosher was to begin with. So we were always used to carrying our food out whenever we went, somewhere, anywhere. We take our food with us when we go on long trips. Where we went to Europe and I brought my Instant Pot, and there was a whole suitcase full of kitchen accoutrements because that was the way we were going to eat. So I think that there's this sort of, again, it's an awareness, it's an appreciation for what food is and what food isn't. We just draw the lines in a different place now than we used to before. And I love that it's fully inclusive of kashrut, in addition to, having this universal mindset of being, a citizen of the world and a citizen of my health.
Right. I think being raised kosher too, for me, I didn't expect the world to accommodate me at every single restaurant and airport. So for me, it's not an inconvenience because I've always done it.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I just wish the kosher laws would have some ethical laws in them as well, if you know what I mean. I've had a few rabbis on the show talking about that.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've been watching that for the last few years, and how they've been trying to get different kinds of seals on better animal welfare certified, this or that, the other. It's just really tough because, as you know, the traditions of sharing meals with families, it always goes back to what we're eating together and how it harkens of what our grandmothers made. And that's tough. My grandmother made sweet and sour tongue, and she would make veal scallopini, and she would make.
I tell you, even when I ate animals, which was only for a few short years, I would not eat that. It was so disgusting to look at,
Yeah.
And I think about it, all my grandmothers died of like diabetes with limb amputation. So is that really worth sharing those kind of meals with family?
Exactly. Yeah, it's tough. And I hesitate being harsh because this is, again, just something that's been passed down. And I think it also was born out of the opportunity of America that, like, wow, you could make it and post-Holocaust and you could have all this meat on your table. There's something about the societal influence that really, pushed those generations to do those kinds of dishes, to make those dishes. And now I think it's our duty to say, let's move forward. Let's bend the arc and go in a different direction.
Great. That's neat. So when did you first get the idea for Plant-Powered Metro? I always like to know when people were you just like taking a rest and all of a sudden it came to you, or how did that happen?
I think the more I got out and got to meet people locally in the plant-based movement, I realized that the thing that was missing the most was connecting the dots. You and I could be doing completely similar things in very different areas of the city, or we could have, one focus over here where we're speaking a certain language about plant-based diets, and another over here, maybe it's nutritarian. And the question was, well, how do we make sure that everybody out there can hear all of these voices and know that they're connected as part of a greater movement? So I felt like it was important to create the sandbox that we could all play in. Not that Plant-Powered Metro New York is going to be the only sandbox. Like, I feel like the word that we use, and the term that I use for my own position, is a network. I consider myself the network director. So we are a network of change agents who are all out there and making things happen. And we're trying to create centralized resources that we can all use in different ways. Maybe it's our Latino organizers who are engaging folks in Spanish and need to adapt tools that we've created for English speaking audiences. And that's happening now. And maybe it's folks who are seniors who need a slightly different narrative. They're living on a fixed income and they have certain nutritional needs that are a little different from the average person. We can do that. And so I think it's, again, trying to say, let's create resources that many different kinds of people can use. And then let's make sure that anybody who's out there doing the work has the backing of many more. So you're not a standalone, you know, again, a change agent in the world needs a community. So that's what we're here for.
Did you think of the name for the organization?
Sort of. I remember when we started, we weren't sure if we could use the term plant powered, whether it would be trademarked or something. And then we realized, no, it's fine. One of my closest collaborators in creating Plant Powered Metro New York, her name is Lynn Diamond. She's a lawyer by training. And so she's been very helpful in answering some of those questions. And we said, you know what, let's just run with it. And yeah, people have told me it's a little bit of a mouthful, but we wanted it to be really representative. We want people to know that we're about empowerment. We want people to know that we're about the whole Metro New York community, which really includes not just New York City itself, but also the surrounding counties, because it's such a fluid area where people are always coming and going. You might live in one place and work in another. You might have family over here while you're over there. So it just seems like we're all one big, crazy, happy millions of people family. And we're better together that way.
So you serve all of New York, not necessarily just the one borough.
That's the idea. Yeah. I started off working in Manhattan, but brought people onto the team. You know, the co-founders along with me were pod leaders in the Bronx, in Long Island, in Queens. And now we have people who are in New Jersey, Westchester County, definitely Brooklyn. We've got a big champion in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Borough President's Office, and many people on the ground, you know, everybody from Dr. Osfeld in the Bronx to Dr. McMacken at Bellevue in Manhattan, and so many others. And it's becoming quite an incredible community. We have a lot of medical advisors who are part of our, you know, again, creating the credibility for the work, and they're also wonderful educators who we call on all the time. We get calls so often from different organizations coming to us and saying, "Can you present a workshop? Can you teach my community about this topic?" And we're trying to be essentially a clearinghouse and a matchmaker between the people who are perhaps the best educators or good fit educators and ambassadors with the communities that are looking for this message, and also creating new audiences as well, because we've got to get out there and make sure we're not preaching to the choir. That's absolutely number one.
Yeah. Who are the people that find you? How do they find you? And when there's not a pandemic, do you have in-person events?
Yes. So before the pandemic, we did in-person events. We have a tier of volunteers who we call our organizers, and they're sort of the most engaged and active in going out and talking to the organizations that live around them in their particular neighborhoods, or they might serve a particular demographic. And so, you know, those folks are the ones initiating conversations and partnerships. And then we go out also, we go to health fairs, we show up at schools, we show up at clinics or out in the park, wherever it might be. And we set up a table and we'll talk to people. And it's been all hands on deck. And it's been lovely to see how when there's this one opportunity over here, and you let people know, here's something you can do, our volunteers, they show up. They always show up. They're so excited to contribute, even if it's ambiguous. And that's sort of the fun thing about this work, is that so much of this hasn't been done before. I mean, there are folks who've been doing nutrition workshops, but we're trying to go beyond the idea of the workshop and really have this inspire people to the extent that it's not about the frontal information, but more about how do you take it home? How do you feel support? How do you feel like you're in relationship with others who have walked this path, and with your fellow community members who are going through the same struggles together, and humanize it for everybody. So I think when I think about our volunteers, it's not about necessarily the work that they do in getting the message out. It's about the relationships that they're building that help to activate people's excitement and help them to sort of really feel motivated about taking the next step. So going beyond just the knowledge to, well, how do I clear out my kitchen? And what am I going to do when I show up to buy produce and, you know, it's not up to snuff? Like, where do I go? What do I do when I have a new kitchen tool that I don't know how to use? Really just trying to create the support behind all of that.
That's cool. Have other cities done the same and created Plant Power their city?
That's a great question. I think if you look at the sort of the map of all the pods that are in Plant Pure Communities pod network, there are some groups that have what I would say is go beyond the potluck idea, which is to really do outreach and try to build relationships in the ways that we're doing. But there are not that many. The ones, of course, that I know best are the Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group in Michigan, and in Sedona, Healthy World Sedona is another that they've been doing similar kinds of work. And I'm sure there are others, and I would love, actually, I'm trying to meet more folks who are out there doing the work, because I think it would be wonderful for us to have more of a community of practice where we share notes about how we engage this or that community and what resources we use. I think there's a lot more work to do to create the grassroots tools that will really be effective to help people fully embrace plant-based nutrition on the ground.
I've heard many people say it has to be a grassroots movement. Why do you think that is? Because it's not going to come from the top down, is it?
No, I mean, I feel, here's why. Okay, how did I find Dr. Campbell? I found his book through an algorithm on barnesandnoble.com. That was luck, I would say. I don't know, is it luck? Is it some science knew me? I don't know. But I think it should not be chance that people learn about plant-based nutrition. And obviously there's a lot of great work coming through the American College of Lifestyle Medicine to make sure that doctors are going to be fully informed about how to use diet and lifestyle in their practice so that patients hear it from clinicians. But I think you and I both know that you can do a lot of good even without a doctor in your own kitchen. And so in order to get there and to help people, especially those who don't have access to great healthcare, to make the most of it and to start reversing their diseases even before they get to the exam room, I think that's where we come into play. Let's not make a chance. Let's have some systematic process where we're going out and meeting people. And we have I like to think in strategic terms. This is going back to my identity as somebody who's been trained in organizational change. I think that we need the strategy that will roll things out even more systematically through communities so that nobody can say, oh, it was just so lucky that I happened to chance upon Forks Over Knives on this video platform, right? So that's really my vision. Make it a no-brainer for folks.
Well, you're working with some extraordinary people like Chef Carol Levy. She's been on the show many times. She does work with you, I know.
Absolutely. Chef Carol's great. And you know what I love about Chef Carol? She came through our Jumpstart program. So early on, we started these Jumpstarts, again, in the spirit of how Nelson Campbell ran his in Plant Pure Nation, the documentary. And we ran one, our very first one at the JCC in Manhattan. And Carol was a member of that group. And she came through it knowing how to do everything. She was right on. And it was because of her chef training. Like, she got it. She understood that she could modify recipes in this or that way. And she started experimenting with being a pastry chef. That was what she had done a lot of before in baking. And, baking can be a little tougher than putting things in a pot on a stove. But she loves doing that. And what I think when I see Carol and when I see how successful she is now, to me, that's a success of our community. That's a success that we can say we are in fact empowering the next generation of leaders for the plant-based world. And so the more and more we can elevate voices like hers and experiences like hers, I think the better off we are, because now, Carol does a cooking show for our community every month now, and she gets dozens and dozens of people signing up and showing up and just loving every moment of those demos. So if one person can do that because they've been changed, then how much more can we all do together?
Well, I want to make sure we validate experiences like yours, because to get endometriosis to get better in 2 weeks, that's huge. And even if just one person finds this video and says, hey, maybe if I just don't do this for a couple of weeks, we'll see what happens. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, I would hope so. And there's a lot of conversation, I think, that needs to be had in the fertility world too, because there's, it's just a lot of high-tech conversation with every disease, no matter what it is. But I want people who have had struggles with, their fertility, or who have had conditions like endometriosis, whether it's PCOS or fibroids to understand that nutrition can help. It can't always turn the tides completely, but it can, I think it can alleviate a lot of the issues. And I would hope that there could be more research on this as well. This is something I'd love to do. And in the future, one of the great partnerships we've had on the ground is with the researchers at SUNY Downstate University. They're in their School of Public Health. We have a wonderful colleague there, Elizabeth Helsner, who is a member of their Committee on Plant-Based Health and Nutrition. And we partnered with her earlier this year to study one of our jumpstarts. And she and a graduate student, Lianna Besson, worked with us to sort of observe and put some muscle in the research behind what the participants were actually going through and how that impacted them. So we're hoping to publish a study with them later this year with some of those findings. It's just a preliminary study. We weren't even able to do biometrics because it was COVID and the phlebotomy services weren't even available to us. But in the future, we'd like to do more of that to really show that community-based research has a lot of promise. And so, you've got all of these clinical trials and things going on in let's say, the more buttoned up academic way. And I want to be a part of helping to bring out what you can do on the community level and how it can influence the academic conversation. So you never know, in the future, maybe we'll do a jumpstart or some other intervention with women who have conditions like I did, and see what we can find with a whole food plant-based diet as the intervention.
Nice. How did you hook up with Eric Adams? And in case somebody watching isn't familiar with who he is, maybe you could say.
Sure. So Eric Adams is our Brooklyn Borough president. And by the time folks see this recording, the mayoral campaign will be over, but he is running for mayor as of right now. And the election is a week from now, so we'll see. But he was personally changed, of course, by whole food plant-based nutrition and reversed type 2 diabetes. And it was just an amazing case, right, where he had advancing blindness and really, his numbers were through the roof and turned it completely around. What I love about Eric Adams is how supportive and accessible he has been to us. We work closely with his staff. I met him, I think I probably met him through his staff. If you haven't met her yet, Chef AJ, you should meet Rachel Atchison, who's really a key player in the political space when it comes to plant-based nutrition. And Rachel, she's an organizer extraordinaire. We work closely together. And what we're finding is that, you can only do so much politically. There's a lot you can do politically to change policy and get people to understand what is important. That's definitely been a feature of his mayoral campaign, is to talk about food and to talk about the importance of nutrient-dense foods instead of calorie-dense foods. And yet there's more that needs to be done. We have to sort of meet him at the ground and say, here, let's help you. So we've been, I would say, the lucky beneficiaries of a lot of referrals from his office, where there are organizations that want to do more with plant-based nutrition, and we're sort of equipped. We're the next step in the process to help go deeper with those organizations, and to strategize and talk about how can we make change in a bigger way within the community. So that's been a really wonderful and supportive relationship.
That's fantastic. I've had him on the show. He's wonderful. New Jersey isn't far from New York. I wonder if you had any influence with Cory Booker.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd love to connect with Cory Booker. We haven't done any work there yet. We have certainly a number of folks who are close in, who are interested in serving as volunteers with Plant Powered Metro New York and New Jersey, and I'd love to do more work there, but it's that's on the horizon, not yet.
One of the things I do with this show, my purpose is I call them the usual suspects, the people that I interview that get multiple views, Dr. Furman, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Greger, and Dr. Barnard. Of course, I want to keep having them on, but I'm trying to uncover gems throughout the world that are doing things like you, so that people can know that you don't have to be a doctor, that everybody can make a difference. So let's say somebody is inspired by what you did. What can they do in their community to do something either similar or exactly like what you've done?
Absolutely. I'm happy to talk to anybody one-on-one if you want to reach out to me and we can have that conversation. But I think the most important thing is to understand, what are your strengths? What do you know how to do best? And how can you put them to work? For me, I happen to be a type A organizer. I know how to organize, how to take a vision and get all the steps in place and make it happen. For better or for worse, sometimes I bowl people over a little bit, but I try to be as collaborative as I can. And that's something that I had to really learn as an adult, was how do I widen my capacity to be inclusive of other people in the process? And so creating Plant Powered Metro New York the way that we did as a network, which is really about creating bottom up capacity instead of me telling people what to do. I create an environment in which people can be successful, I hope. And then from there, they can be successful too. And I think, when I have a conversation with any of our volunteers about where they want to go next and how they can contribute to the movement, it's always to talk about, well, what are your skills? What are your talents? Who do you hang out with? Who's in your networks? How can we bring all of this together and sort of move the needle together through your strengths? So I think if people want to emulate this model, and I think there are many different kinds of community-based models that can work, it's this network-based approach that I think could be, I think personally, it's really cool. And it's not about, some people might say, well, it's a kind of community organizing. I would say it's not really, because community organizing, the way that folks do it, is actually more about policy change. And I have said all along that I don't think our communities are really ready for policy change in the ways that, people fighting for minimum wage or people fighting for fair labor practices are. You have to create demand for healthy eating. And that's where I feel like we fall into this picture. We're out there trying to help folks understand that they want to eat healthier. And then through that, over time, we're going to build, the groundswell of people who will stand up and be a part of policy change in a much bigger way. But until people really believe the evidence behind whole food plant-based nutrition, I just don't know that we're going to get much more than, the beautiful processed meat ban that we just got in our schools, which was amazing. Or, getting nutrition on clinicians' agenda in medical school. But what kind of nutrition? That's sort of the big question. So I think, with my approach, I learned from some folks early on in my career, not long after I graduated from college, about something called network organizing. And the idea isn't about naming particular policies and figuring out how to win them with the people who are impacted most. It's about helping people who have some kind of power to exercise to do it through the strength of relationships that they have in community, and to not necessarily believe that there's any one right way of creating the answer, that actually there may be many paths to the palace, what's the term, that we could take, and each community is going to have their own thing. I actually, I could tell you a story that we had an amazing Haitian medical student in our Jumpstart program earlier this year. And she was inspired and said, you know what, I want to do a plant-based challenge for the Haitian community in the city. And we just sat down to talk about this a few weeks ago, but she's going to work with the local Haitian radio station, Creole speaking station, and bring similar information that she learned in the Jumpstart to her community in her own way. And I think that's just an incredible expression of what leadership can look like when you've sufficiently inspired and empowered somebody. They want to pass it on. They want to pass it forward to their people in whatever way it is. And the more we can create space for that, I think the better off this whole movement is.
You mentioned you had some victory in the schools. Could you talk about what that was?
Yes, I wouldn't say we're responsible for it, but we got an exciting, there was an exciting piece of legislation passed where, I don't know if it's legislation, I'm not too schooled on this kind of thing, but processed meat is no longer allowed in school food in New York City. So that meat, hot dogs and deli meats and that stuff that we know it can contribute to colorectal cancers. That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. And hopefully sugar will be on that list soon.
Oh gosh, yeah. We'll see what happens now that we have a little bit of change in the White House. Mm-hmm.
Isn't there a very famous, very expensive restaurant in New York that went all vegan?
Yes, absolutely. They did. And it's, it's $300 some meals. And I don't know if it's whole food plant-based, but I'm starting to see the conversation on the vegan Facebook pages about what the meal was like, and people are truly amazed. I think the impetus behind it was the environment. Their executive chef and the powers that be in the restaurant were actually inspired to do better for the environment and to have a lower footprint, carbon footprint. So I think that's, again, it's an amazing step. But I don't know that it changes the health conversation. I think there's still a lot more to be said and done to help people understand, you still have to do unprocessed or lower processed foods to get the health benefits you want to see.
Yeah, I have my own story about that. Vegan for 26 years and still got the beginning of colon cancer and was obese. So yeah, I guess baby steps for some people, but right. It's funny when we know what we know and experience what we've experienced, which is a complete reversal in all our disease processes and lost weight and feel great and love our food. It's kind of hard to go back to eat that way.
Absolutely. And I love our food. I totally feel that way. Even when I butcher things in in my kitchen and they don't taste quite right. I don't blame it on the food. I blame it on me. And I know that, just like every other human being, we're not going to have perfection in our meals all the time. But simplicity and, again, like the bounty of the plant kingdom, they inspire me every day.
Nice. How does someone, either as a participant or a volunteer, get involved with your organization?
Great question. So you can reach out to me. I'm Lianna at ppmny.org, and you can have a conversation about it. But there's on our website, we have so much going on. We really, especially with COVID, we just had a flowering of activity online. We've had probably 4 or 5 webinars every week. Sort of like you, Chef AJ. Like there's just so much to talk about in the virtual space. Why not do it? So, on our website, plantpoweredmetrony.org, you can find a lot more information about what we're up to. And, we're trying to bring out going beyond the workshop, trying to help folks who are interested and new to plant-based nutrition to feel like they have a starting place. We have a monthly intro session called Get Started with Whole Food Plant-Based Nutrition. That it's there every month as a way for anybody new to come into the conversation. We are doing virtual nutrition support circles, which are led by a social worker and a psychologist who are part of our volunteer team. We're doing monthly book clubs. We are doing, as I mentioned, Chef Carol's demos and a number of other demos and other culinary programs with different local chefs, and other featured events. So, we try to bring the national voices of folks like Dr. Barnard and Dr. Esselstyn. We've worked with the Esselstyn Family Foundation a bit, just to sort of bring people from afar deep into the community. But when we come back into real life, into in-person events, and we're starting to do that, I'm actually really excited because this summer we're doing farmers market tours. This is the beauty of the network also, where you say, hey guys, let's do farmers market tours. And then you get a bunch of people signing up, and you've got somebody in the Bronx and somebody in Brooklyn and somebody in Manhattan. And suddenly it's like, wow, I can go to the event closest to me and I can see my, where my produce comes from and talk to my farmers. That's something that I really think is a testament to the people in the organization. So
that is just so cool. Well, if you ever decide to do a book club on any of my books, I'd be happy to talk to your group.
Oh, great. I'll let Lynn know. She runs those events, and that would be super fun.
Oh, that's fun. So are you active on any social media? Where would people follow you if they wanted to?
Sure. Yeah. So we have an Instagram channel at plantpoweredmny. And we're pretty active on Facebook. We've got a Facebook group in English and in Spanish. And we have a Facebook page with a few live streams coming out of there every now and then. And also on Meetup, if anybody likes Meetup and just wants to sort of follow the kinds of events that we have, we always post there as well.
Fantastic. Is there anything I did not think to ask you or that you'd like to add?
There's one other thing to mention. Again, I feel like it's a testament to volunteers. We created a new recipe app, which AJ, if you're welcome to submit recipes to it if you'd like. The whole idea behind creating the recipe app was to feature the recipes from folks in our community who are living a whole food plant-based lifestyle, and to create a repository of what we would call green light recipes, things that we know are going to be safe. You don't have to modify them too much, if at all. And this was a product, a labor of love of two of our volunteers, Jim and Hillary, who knew how to get it done and put it together. And you can download or you can access the app at ppmnyinyourkitchen.org. And there's a link right in there to where you can submit a recipe of your own. And we just invite people to take advantage of it and, note what you like and add where you see that there are still holes. We're growing it. We just launched it in early January and hope that it can be a beautiful expression of a community-based, plant-based love.
Well, that is fabulous. Thank you so much. I'm glad you mentioned that. And thank you so much for the work you do.
Thank you, AJ. It's a pleasure.
And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when we have another fabulous guest.